start with those of us who are here. I didn't hear from the others that they weren't coming, so clearly we don't have a quorum for an official meeting, but as long as we're here, I think we should just go over a few things that are on the agenda for today. To begin with, we have the just miscellaneous updates. Nothing really to add since the last meeting in January. The Clabber Tree Washington Street intersection, we discussed then the bids had been received. Since then, a contract has been awarded, and the construction of that intersection is expected to begin in April. So that's some progress that's being made. Another thing that's happened since the last time we met, the planning board reviewed zoning amendment articles. They have 3 zoning amendment articles to consider. One would rezone 2 residentially zoned parcels that are involved in the Islington Center redevelopment project, would rezone those to the local business B district and overlay them with flexible multiple use overlay district 6 to make them have the same zoning as the rest of the parcels in the project. The planning board recommended that the FinCom positively consider that article and intends to recommend that the town meeting approve the article. Another zoning amendment article that the planning board considered, also related to the Islington Center redevelopment project, was an article to amend the zoning bylaw language to allow retail and service establishments of up to 15,000 square feet in FMUOD 6, the Washington Street District, if approved by special permit. That would allow a business such as CVS that's proposed in this project to be larger than the maximum 10,000 square foot requirement that is in the current bylaw. Again, the planning board recommended that the FinCom positively approve that article, and the town meeting is also approved it. And then the third zoning article that the planning board took up at its hearing was the petitioner article, and that proposes putting a cap of 30 residential units on both the FMUOD 6 Washington Street District and the FMUOD 7 High Street District. Right now, the Washington Street District has 12 residential units that were approved by special permit. This would allow up to 18 more. So it would allow the proposed residential units that are part of the Islington Center redevelopment project, if that's approved at town meeting, but it would not allow any additional residential units. So there would be no further opportunity for mixed-use development along Washington Street. In the High Street area, they currently have 6 residential units in the Colburn School Building. So if that petitioner article was passed, that would allow an additional 24 residential units along High Street by special permit. The planning board reviewed that article, and they're recommending that the FinCom vote indefinite postponement on that article. And the reason is that the planning board feels the flexibility is needed to allow mixed-use development in both districts, and that article would take that away. The planning board also expressed some concern that the proposed amendment would not meet the uniformity test in the state zoning requirement, because the developers or property owners who applied for the first residential units would have an opportunity to get them, and once they reach that cap, other property owners would not have that same opportunity. So different property owners in the same zone would not be treated uniformly. So all 3 of those articles are currently being considered by the Finance and Warrant Commission, and they have a hearing scheduled for March 27th.
20th.
No, the 20th.
26th and 27th.
Yeah, the 20th is
March
the
26th.
subcommittee reports.
Right. March 26th and March 27th is the next public hearing on all of the town meeting articles, including those 3 zoning articles. So if you have any concerns, any thoughts on those you want to express, the next step is to express them to the FinCom.
Oh, to the FinCom.
Yeah.
I mean, I was more concerned of probably the ratio between the retail square footage, those 24 left apartment of the total of 30, how can we convert it into square footage and then pretty much compare the square footage in retail, corporate, whatever offices and so on.
So
To create a balance of the mixed use.
the existing bylaw, the language of the existing bylaw says that a residential use, the total of residential uses in a mixed-use project, whether it's an FMUOD 6 or FMUOD 7, cannot be more than 50% of the total square footage of the project. So that cap remains whether the petition article is approved or not. What that means is if you have a 2-story building, 1 story could be residential, 1 story could be commercial, but there's not a finite cap on the square footage of a residential unit, an individual unit. So if the petition article was approved and in the High Street District, 24 additional residential units could be approved, those could be 24 800 square foot single bedroom apartments, or they could be 24 3-bedroom condominiums of 2,000 square feet. There's no differentiation in the bylaw. What would have to happen is that whatever proposal came to the planning board, they would review it and determine if it met all the other criteria and make sure that it has at least that same amount of square footage of residential space is part of the project as commercial space. So that the cap on square footage comes through the rest of the bylaw. It's separate from the cap on the number of units.
Nora, I have two comments. I think when the planning board, or Abby, when the planning board goes back in front of the FinCom on the public hearing, the first two articles you referenced, I think people need to understand they're somewhat technical articles that enable the town to have the opportunity of putting together its agreement with the developer. They really are part of a package, and I think that sort of got lost in the, I think the FinCom, being very straight here, that was not clear to FinCom members who are not actively involved in this process. So I think people need to understand that. It basically are enabling, as far as I'm concerned, articles if the selectmen decide to go forward and finish their development agreement. The second thing is, on that last article, you raised the issue, is it or is it not deemed to be restrictive? That issue came up. Can we have a definitive?
Oh, it's absolutely restricted.
Well, I
There's
think
no
it's
doubt that it's restricted.
I think that's extremely important that that come out in whatever, because otherwise we're going to spend a lot of time and energy in an article that basically I'm being told it's not going to be legally supportable.
Well, so it's clearly restrictive. Whether it would pass muster at the Attorney General's office remains to be seen. When the Attorney General reviews a zoning article, they do defer to the town in most cases. But what would likely happen if they approved it, they would approve it with a caution not to apply it in a manner that created a problem with the uniformity clause.
Okay.
I'm not sure how you would do that.
I think what's happened here is in the attempt of the town to clarify to the citizens so they would not think that 500 units could be developed, we came up with that standard of 90. All of a sudden now,
right,
it's being used as a tool, as far as I'm concerned, to be overly restrictive and fairly narrow in focus in terms of what options are. And I think I'm very concerned about the impact of that amendment if it were to ever be approved.
Well, I'll do my best to further explain
Right.
that. At the next FinCom meeting, the FinCom will also be considering the two selectmen non-zoning warrant
Right.
articles associated with this project, and that will give them the broader picture of how
So
the
what are the
articles
two
work
select,
together.
so are there 4 zoning articles that have to go through?
No, related to the Islington Center project, there are 2 zoning articles
Right.
and 2 non-zoning articles.
Okay, all right. But I think the FinCom needs to understand that it is a package. I mean, basically, if the town is going to support us, it has to support the package. You can't just, you can't vote one of them down, because then you basically defeat the program.
We'll try to make that
Okay.
clear at the next meeting.
I think the other point to be made is that the restriction on the number of units that are being proposed at 30, there was a suggestion that was made that, well, you can set it at 30 like we did with, when we set up 1% of the total housing units could be converted into accessory apartments back in the day. It's not a comparable issue. And what I mean by that is when you set a cap at 30, as soon as that 30 is reached or approached, anybody else that was planning to utilize that bylaw will be dissuaded from using that bylaw because there's that limit. And so to have to go to town meeting with a project is something that developers usually avoid because that's a high hurdle to pass, and they'll usually go to something either less onerous or they'll just punt on the project. So
Yeah, I think, Michael, there's also an underlying theme here, and I don't know how we address it, that is this antithesis towards apartments or what I can see more moderate living being made available to people. And I meant what I said when I said, I was driving down 109 and looked at these homes built in 1846 and 1848. I said to myself, so suppose those citizens decided there could be no more development in town. I mean, you can really get to the point where, I think these people tend to say that they speak for a lot more people than they think they do. And I just want to make sure that the other side is clearly heard. We need options for housing in this town, which we just don't have.
At the same time, it may be a conflict between the concept of flexible multiple use, if you put a cap on it, so it's not as flexible as you think, and why is the cap only on the housing when there is a high demand? So everything needs to be driven by the market. So it's good to give some flexibility as of how the market would go as well.
Well, the FMUOD bylaw was written specifically to encourage more creative, more predictable commercial development. It includes a small housing section to help along with that process. If you remove the housing section for the 2 downtown areas, you disincentivize redevelopment.
As you pointed out, that stretch down near Dunkin' Donuts and the closed gas station, and that's what it's going to remain unless we can, have some decent development down there.
So we had hoped, and that's why we instituted the FMUOD district in Washington Street and High Street. We hoped it would be a catalyst for redevelopment of the area, and it has been in Islington Center. So it's been successful here. We'd like to build upon that success, and we'd like to see the same go forward in High Street. So I often hear from people who want to know when is High Street's turn? When will there be redevelopment of some of the commercial areas in High Street? And the answer is as soon as we have a property owner who's interested in redeveloping those projects, and we don't have that at the moment. But we're hopeful that at least with our zoning in place, we have the opportunity. If the project comes along, we have an opportunity to consider it and to work with the developer to bring a project that's beneficial to the town and to the surrounding neighborhoods.
And also the concept of mixed use is not just horizontally placed, but also vertically placed.
Yes.
So ideally to have a very successful, a business center or kind of like town center, you have to think also vertically to have the mixed use also.
Mm-hmm. So the only other thing I think that we probably should try to tackle tonight without a quorum is just to go through the latest renderings from the Islington Center project. These were just posted to the website today, and the planning board will be looking at these next week when it meets. The next planning board meeting to consider this project is on March 20th at 7 p.m. at the Downey School. This was a meeting that was planned for last Tuesday night and was canceled due to the storm. So it's been relocated, same location, new date, same time. So we hope anyone who's interested in the project will come to the meeting on March 20th at the Downey School at 7 p.m. Anyone can also go onto the town's website and download the information and look at all the new material that we received. Most significant is a set of renderings. So everyone here has a copy of those renderings. If anyone in the audience would like a copy, we do have extras. Check. These are designed to show existing conditions and then side by side a computer-generated model of the proposed conditions. And I think they're helpful because they show the massing of the existing structures and then the massing of the proposed new structures. So it gives you a better sense than previous drawings have done of what exactly is proposed and what the effect will be from different viewpoints throughout the center.
We're not going to have a traffic light anymore?
So these are computer-generated renderings. Wherever you don't put in the specific building, it's just going to show trees, and yeah, it doesn't show features like traffic lights.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very time-consuming model to build, and so putting adjacent properties, putting houses or other commercial structures in, it's just not an effective use of time. So ignore the trees. Those trees are not there. Even on the fire station, the driveway of the fire station, it's full of trees. The baseball field is full of trees. But if you just look at the buildings themselves, just look at the massing of the buildings and the orientation of the buildings, and I think it gives you a good flavor for what the project is now proposing. One other part of the project that's changed since this group last met, we had a lot of discussion on the Blue Heart Tavern. And the plans that were presented to the planning board prior to the February 7th Islington Task Force meeting had eliminated the Blue Heart Tavern. The developer at that time was concerned with the cost of the project and did not think there was a place in the project for the Blue Heart Tavern. At the planning board's meeting on February 27th, there was further discussion, and the planning board encouraged the developer to set aside a parcel of land. Actually, I think this occurred prior to that meeting. Came out of discussion from the February 13th planning board meeting, and then we had new plans at the February 27th, which actually showed a location for the Blue Heart Tavern to end up if we're successful in finding funds to restore that building. The planning board is not making the restoration of that building a requirement of the project, so that the limited number of project funds do not have to be used to restore that building, but it's providing land where that building could be relocated if there's another funding source
And
for restoration.
Who would own that? Right now it shows here on one of the slides, the Blue Heart Tavern next to the library, community center. If it's not able to be built, who owns that land?
So under the current land disposition discussion, the town would own the land and would then see what it could do. If there's a private party that's interested in restoring the building, the town could sell that land and the building to the private party or lease it to them. We have the Obed Baker House on High Street that we've been trying to work out an arrangement for years and haven't been successful.
Right.
But we also had the Colburn School and we were very successful with that. So there may be an opportunity, we don't know yet. Whether it would be publicly funded, privately funded, how it would be used, those are all questions that remain up in the air. But the important part is that the planning board found a way to find space in the plan that would be a location where that building could go if the other boxes were checked and if funds were eventually found. So it's still a project to be discussed, but at least it has an opportunity for a home if it gets to that point.
I had two other, not just sort of raised as issues that need to be, I think, discussed when maybe the planning board especially goes back in front of the finance commission again, and that is, one is parking and the other one is traffic, because I still think there's a lot of confusion over those. And one of the thoughts I have is on the traffic. It's my understanding that the majority of the traffic is basically pass-through traffic. Where this project goes forward or not, the traffic problem's going to be there. And I think that's got to be stated as if it's a fact up front, whether it's 50, 60, 70, or 80 or 90% of the traffic is flow-through traffic. So at the end of the day, whether we may be able to do some things to make it safer and moderate it, but this project is not creating the traffic problem.
Correct. This project is providing an opportunity to improve the traffic situation through signalization, but it will not decrease the traffic. There's an existing
But I think that
volume
needs to come
problem.
out fairly clearly, because I think everybody is jumping on the traffic bandwagon, okay? The other traffic issue is somehow to discuss how the CVS lot is going to work, okay, as proposed. And then somebody I'm just picking up the issues that I became aware of, the whole issue of in the evening, that, when people want to use the baseball fields. And my sense is that is sort of the end of the day and a lot of less active business. I don't know the answer, but I've heard those concerns come up, and my thought is if somebody could at least address that to the best of our knowledge, okay? Rather than waiting for the question to pop up, okay? So those would be my two suggestions. And then on parking spaces, it's fascinating to listen to these two engineers. One says X amount is fine, and somebody else gets up and says you have to have a theoretical a lot more. Somehow I wish that the two sides could get together and say, yes, in a neutral way, this is a reasonable number of parking
So
spaces.
that's up to the planning board. The planning board is the arbiter there. They need to take a look at the parking that's provided and the demand for the parking and make a determination of whether they think it's efficient. The planning board is very used to dealing with parking throughout the town, and it's reviewed many different uses, and it knows what the bylaw requires in underlying zoning, and it knows what's actually used. We have take a look at Roach Brothers.
Yeah, no, that's my whole point, Nora. And do they, maybe that point needs to come out, that the planning board is used to dealing with, the staff has been through these issues, that's why we have a traffic consultant, and it's our best interest to make it. What I'm trying to do is to make sure, instead of he said, she said, that we get to some factual closing points, so we don't go around and around and around on the same issues.
So I expect the planning board to spend a good deal of time at the March 20th meeting discussing parking. And the way that I expect them to tackle that, many of the uses that are here today in Islington Center will continue under the new project.
Right.
MMO will just move to another building. Same with youth and family services, recreation programs, CVS. These are all current users that have current parking needs that are met. So it's the new users that will create the demand for the new spaces. There's the 18 condominium units which will create a demand. The planning board believes that demand will be 18 parking spaces. The developer believes that condo owners would prefer to have private rights to 2 spaces per condo, so they're providing 36 parking spaces. The planning board and the developer will discuss that further. On the residential, the planning board's position is that there's too much parking. On the commercial, there may not be enough, but that's what the planning board has to look at. And it'll all depend on what uses go into the new building. So we know that one building is proposed to have CVS, another building is proposed to keep Crown Cleaners, have MMO, and then have one other commercial space. And then the building that's proposed to come where we are today and replace the ICC, that will have up to 13,000 square feet of commercial use. It could be 2 users, it could be 5 users. It's all still to be determined.
But I think it would be useful for people to hear that how does the planning board work through these types of issues? How does it balance it? Its role is to come up and weigh the factors that come to a decision, okay?
And they will do that, just as they did on University Station, where they ended up with a project, again, which the planning board thought would have too much parking, but the developer thought it needed every one of those spaces. Anyone who takes a look down there, I think, would agree that except for on the week between Thanksgiving and early December is the only time when those parking spaces are full.
Okay. I'm just saying be proactive in addressing these issues rather than waiting for them to get, come out of the weeds.
Abby, did you have anything else to add on any other aspects of the project that may have evolved since our last task force meeting?
No, I don't think so. There's also a summary that they put together, kind of, to go through what's being proposed. Did you get a copy of that? Yeah. So, I think.
Did you have a copy of that?
Now this goes through what Nora had really just discussed, kind of just summarizing what actually is being proposed. The number of parking spaces, what the planning board has looked at. I think last time we talked about the affordable housing. At the last planning board meeting, they did accept the applicant's proposal for 3 rental units off-site in the area, 1 over across the street, 321 Washington, and 2 in 256, which is above the ski stop. Those are existing apartments that are going to be converted to affordable units.
So the affordability component of the project is one of the most important parts of the project to the town. Because this project, as it's designed, would add 12 new units of affordable housing to the town's subsidized housing inventory. We're currently over 10%, which is the minimum necessary for a town to protect itself against unfriendly 40B projects. But when the 2020 census comes out, we have to account for all the housing that was built between 2010 and 2020. If not for additional affordable housing units that can be added to our subsidized housing inventory, we could fall below 10%. And the instant we fall below 10%, as soon as those census numbers are reported, we become liable to open the doors to an unfriendly 40B project with no protections. So it's in our interest to preserve
lost
that.
inventory too, right? Westwood Glen?
We did. Westwood Glen had
People need to understand
156 units
Right.
of affordable housing. Unlike all of the other projects that we have worked with over the years, that one did not have a perpetuity requirement. That project had its affordable housing units tied to a Mass Housing Association mortgage on the property, and it expired after a term of that mortgage.
And it was one of the first ones, and it's been explained to me that at the time the state wasn't comfortable or felt that they needed to give developers an out after 20 years because they had no experience with it. So they put a clause in that contract and the early contracts that they then eliminated in future contracts because they realized developers were perfectly willing to go forward with these projects, even if they were in perpetuity with the affordable housing. So,
And Nora, I would say the understanding of this issue in town is extremely low, that it's just not on a lot of people's radar screens. And it's a very sensitive issue politically, but I think there's got to be an education effort to make people aware of.
Right, we will absolutely.
Because, you know, those folks who are worried about our schools being overrun or all the sort of, they use the negative arguments of development, take a look at the project right off of 128 that's being developed. Needham lost control of it. And it went into a beautiful residential neighborhood, and it's like 100 units going in there.
Yeah. And Norwood has had continuing issues with 40B
Yeah.
projects, which they simply cannot prevent. So when you don't meet the minimum 10% requirement, you really lose any ability to negotiate with the developer.
You know, maybe one of the ways to talk about this is to make it a positive thing, that the town is looking for ways of frankly remaining above 10%, you know, and protecting its flexibility so that we can determine our own future. And therefore, it's been very important to the town in working with any developer to increase the number of affordable units. And therefore, projects like this become very, very important to the town.
Yes, and that's what we have been doing for years, and that's what we did with University Station as
Right.
well. We allowed a residential component and supported that residential component because that we knew would get us above 10% and give us the protection we were looking for. We set the number so that, knowing that we were about to lose Westwood Glen, we set the number so that we would capture those units. But now, as we get closer to 2020, we also need to capture the units that were developed over the years. So all those single-family
How many
homes.
housing units are there in Westwood? What's the correct number? Ballpark?
You know, I don't have it with me, but it's over 5,000.
5,000.
it's 5,226 or something.
So we're supposed to have-
that were on the census in 2010. The number will be 5,300.
600 something now,
Yeah.
yes. So we've
The-
gained a significant number of housing units over the last 10 years.
350 came from University Avenue, although those were all covered with affordable housing.
Right,
so-
22 at Fox Meadow Estates, another 10 at Westwood Estate subdivision that's under construction now. Westview Estates off of Winter Street, I believe, had 12 units. And then there are a number of properties in town where the extra lot was sold off for development. So we have quite a few houses to
So are
make
we
up
supposed
for.
to have 500 affordable units in town? Is that the way it works? Just curious.
Yes, 500, yeah,
It's-
10%.
right, about 520 something today, and we will need to have more than that, maybe 580 something in the future. I don't know the exact number. I do have it calculated, but I don't have it with me.
We were when we set up the University Avenue situation, we assumed that Westwood Glen probably would fall off, and we had it fixed that we were 1 unit above 10% if Westwood Glen fell off, and it did. And so we've added some affordable housing units since then. So we're better than 1 unit at the moment. But as Nora's pointed out, there's been several units that have been built since then that have no affordable units set aside. And those units, but that's what's putting us at risk.
And it's because that's by right development. That's just straight subdivision, which state law does not enable you to put a requirement on, to add the need for affordable housing. So if a property can only be developed by special permit, that opens the door to the town making a requirement that affordable housing be included in that special permit project. But for a straight subdivision, we just don't have that ability. So any houses that were developed in subdivisions or by approval not required plan, where a lot with street frontage was divided into 2 lots and an additional unit was built, or in the case of a single-family home that was converted to a 2-family home. We have several of those. We have a provision in our bylaw that allows that to preserve older homes, to make sure that they're not subdivided, where we might end up seeing 3 or 4 housing units. We allow them to be converted to 2-family structures, but we have to count for those second units.
And I just wanted to dispel one thing that got said, that So if you fall below 10%, that eliminates our ability to negotiate. It doesn't really eliminate the ability to negotiate, but what it does do is it eliminates the leverage that we have to negotiate.
Well,
So
that's what,
that's
they needed.
important.
They were able, it was this big.
Right.
They were able to negotiate it down to this big,
Right.
but it should have been this big.
Right, right,
So
right.
good point, they lost their leverage.
They lost the leverage, and as a result of that, you can't get it to the most acceptable project you would want to have.
You also have no control over the location. So a 40B
No.
project can be in a residential zone, it can be in a commercial zone. Westwood has very little commercial land, and we try our best to make sure that that little commercial land is redeveloped for profitable, continuing commercial uses. We could lose commercial land to solely residential development under 40B. And that would have a great effect, not only in the cost to the town of the residential units that might come out of that, but in the loss of future commercial value.
Perfect example is the Polaroid site.
Yes, in Norwood, right.
What's this one now?
The
Polaroid site in
site in
Norwood.
Norwood is commercially zoned property that is now the site of a large 40B project.
That huge project is 40B? Where the whole, there's two of them, yeah.
There's, well, I think one is not gonna go forward, but I think
Oh, okay.
I heard that. But the other one is, or has gone forward.
For a lot of units.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
That you can see from Manhattan Street. I never realized it was that close. You drive up Manhattan Street, you can see the buildings.
You can?
Yeah.
Nora, are we okay to comment about the volume and everything
Yes,
on that?
yes.
Okay. Well, every new project has pros and cons, and what I see currently right now is pretty much very compatible in size. It's pretty much only the U shape, the open space, that is being slightly rotating on the back, and the ADA compliance, that ramp, I don't know how people have survived without any big accidents, because it's going straight to the road. Imagine somebody with a wheelchair literally not being able to stop, where it will end. That is literally a big no-no when it comes to the design, today's design standards. So looking at what has been proposed, this is a much better option to have that kind of on the back. You have more possibility to make that ADA compliant. And also having those outdoor seating and creating open space with a different kind of texture on the paving, it's quite a smart move, because that is visible, it's at the corner, and people can use that spot. Versus now, nobody can use that spot unless they get into the building. So this is what I see being very kind of, this is more towards the something that has improved in this rendering compared with what we have. Also the function, not to forget what we are gaining and what we are bringing up to code. And it's pretty much that big ridge on the third floor that is not going to affect us when we are at the street level. This is pretty much, people may be afraid to see that volume when they see it from up above, like air view, but none of us will experience it that way. So looking down, it's a smart move to have everything at the zero kind of level, close to the, on Washington Street, parallel. So the retail, the doors are very close to the sidewalk. Also the relocation, the location of the playground is much a safer location than being on the main road. So what I would recommend for when it comes to the volume of this, or probably the steeple, it's not to jeopardize the function. How can that reach on the upper level, like where the existing is, be a little bit lower without damaging the function? This is the only recommendation I have. And Is this building, along with the previous buildings, how is the noise level? What are the construction standards when it comes to, let's say, if you have in the same level, like you have residents, do you have any complaints in regards to that, or how do you want to approach that to have this kind of like, how is the structure of these buildings going to happen? And if you have, let's say, retail versus kindergarten, they're gonna have a demising wall. So how can this be a problem? You're gonna have a noise level on the MMO side. Does that affect the other side, the retail, or it can be vice versa? It can be a residential unit and so forth.
So the mixed-use building is podium style. Podium style, if you're familiar with podium style, it's 2 slabs with metal deck with concrete, and then from there up it's a wood frame. So in this scenario, you really only have 1 floor of wood and there's 2 Q decking because of the parking underneath. So with that said, we use open eye joist construction, a 24-inch cavity, and we fill it with ICD insulation. So that gives you a denser for a sound barrier, and you have double 5/8 sheetrock for even more sound.
Between walls, the non-supported walls.
Correct. And the non-supporting walls also are 2x6 staggered, and you have that full 12-inch cavity is filled with ICD again. So the incomplete box of the unit is ICD, floor, ceiling, and all the walls.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Are the developers here to answer them? All right, do any members of the audience have any comments or questions you'd like to address to the task force or to the developer?
Are there any maps, like overhead looking straight down?
At the back of that document, there are 2 site plans, one for the east side of the project and one for the west side of the project.
Thank you.
You have a question?
Yes.
Hi, Jack Campion, 6 Brookfield Road. I have 2 questions. One is, and it's just maybe one of poor recollection, condos versus rental units. I recall a discussion about the advantage of rental units in that the developer owner could retain control over the occupancy versus condo units whereby once they're sold, there's no control with respect to subletting or rental, etc. And now you're dealing with numerous landlords as opposed to one landlord. Comments, feedback, am I recalling that correctly? Was there a decision firmly made to go condo versus rental?
So the project originally, when it came before the task force almost 2 years ago, contained 28 one-bedroom apartments. And through a lot of public input, there was a request that the developer consider changing the apartments into condos to increase home ownership. And there was a thought that people who live in condominiums may take a more active role in the community than people who live in apartments and may not stay for as long. So the developer considered that, and at a loss of project funds made that change. So the project is less profitable as a condominium development than it is as an apartment complex.
If that was as a result of a consensus?
Yes, so that did come out of discussions at the task force meetings over the past year and a half. And there was an outcry for that change.
And I think it's important to point out that the loss of profitability is not only on the developer side, but it's also on the municipal side. And the developer is much more willing, or would have been much more willing to provide the town with additional funds if he had rental units that he would have an income stream over years than a one-time income stream that he gets from the condominium sales. So, there's economics on 2 sides of that ledger. The other point that you made was that that the condominiums could be rented. Well, the hope is that people are moving into condominium units that they're gonna occupy, but there's no ability it'll be owned by them. It's like your home. If you decided that you're gonna relocate someplace, but you decided you didn't want to sell your home and wanted to rent your home, you can do that, and there's nothing we can do to stop you from doing that, or your neighbors.
Bylaws can stop that.
Huh?
Condominium bylaws can prevent that or cap it.
A homeowners association within the condominium documents, yes. There could be requirements for the members of the board to restrict or have a review authority over leasing of those condominium units. But the town would not be able to enforce that. That would be enforced by
the association.
Right.
Understood. My second question is architectural, and it has to do with the steeple. Has there been any discussion or determination as to the design of the steeple? And I say that because this current steeple here, from the, I guess what you call the belfry area above, is octagonal, whereas the rendering is showing only four-sided.
The intention is for the steeple to be replicated in kind. These are computer-generated drawings, and I think that the detail just didn't come through in the generation. But that was my understanding from speaking to the architect. That is the intention, to replicate the steeple.
It's your intent, the architect's intent, to replicate this steeple in detail.
So our intent, we talked about this, we're gonna cut it and bring it back to our warehouse and replicate it in our warehouse and then bring it back with the crane. So we're gonna make a replica of that exact steeple.
Very good.
We can't do it in the air, we have to do it on the ground.
Understood. Is that, just a point of information, is it better to actually replicate it versus try to restore it or reinforce it, reuse it?
If we restore it, the problem with restoring this is you're gonna have to paint it. Today's day and age, you have AZEC, where there's no maintenance, it lasts for 25 years. If I reuse this, you gotta paint it, you gotta bond it, it's really not, it looks good for the first 4 or 5 years, and then it starts peeling.
Okay.
So I think I could do this exact look with a better material.
Okay, thank you. Glad to hear that.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Can I just comment on George's, about the parking at those baseball fields? So, George, we thought about this a lot about the kids in the baseball. So, I believe that the parking is really going to be used the same way it's used today. So today, there's people that park in the CVS building, which I own, and nobody's telling them to move. And it's going to be same down the line. As you come, once the mixed-use development is up, actually there'll be more parking. So, as it's used today, it's going to be used tomorrow.
I understand that, but it sort of was raised as an issue, what are you going to do for us? And I think the point is, you're saying the same capacity is going to be there.
Correct.
There may be future ways of improving the parking for Morrison Park as well. There are people that cross that street now mid-block, and it's very unsafe. They shouldn't be doing it now. They shouldn't be doing it if this project goes through. What we need to do is find safer, convenient parking next to Morrison Park, and we're working on that. I'll also point out that there is ample parking at Roach Brothers on the same side of the street where people can park at Roach Brothers. Roach Brothers is not chasing them out either. I think they appreciate that people will park there and go to the store as well. But they can park there and walk through Morrison Park to the baseball field. Much, much safer way to do it.
Right.
Some families do that. Others choose to the unsafe route and allow their children to cross East Street mid-block. And there's not much we can do about that other than encourage people just not to do it.
We've had a long-standing
Yes.
debate, Paul and I, we're on the same side. It's not a debate among us. That crossing after the CVS parking lot entrance is absolutely horrible. You have 4 lanes of traffic, 2 in each direction, and children passing in between cars is a very, very dangerous situation. Going up not very far, 100 feet, get to the stoplight, press the button and get traffic controls, and then cross with the traffic controls is what everybody ought to be doing, but nobody does it. It's that extra those extra steps, and I think Little League, if and when they get around to putting the snack shack in, had intended to make it so that in order to get into the ball field around the snack shack, you would literally have to come at it from the top, which would encourage people to go.
Michael, I totally agree with you. It's just one of those other issues. What I was trying to do is all the issues I heard is make sure they're up front and we address them proactively. I couldn't agree with you more. Any kid who tries to cross East Street, you know, I've seen it. You just shut it.
Makes you cringe.
Doing it, yeah.
And I think Nora's got the right idea. We want to find more parking in that block,
Right.
so nobody has to cross the street, that they're there without having to go into the roadway.
And that's another case of an existing condition. It's a problem now, and we're working to improve it. This project can accomplish a lot of things, but it can't be all things to all people.
That was my
There's a
point.
limit.
Exactly, but besides that, simultaneously, the project for the East Street Bridge is actually happening.
It is.
So pretty much you see all the materials are being there. They're working very early in the morning. So you'll see there 2 sidewalks, large
And
enough,
bicycle lanes.
bicycle lanes, and that will give you like another options besides just the car. So it's more, it brings more vibrancy to the center. So all the other part of the neighborhood, or Carol Ave and so forth, they have a close distance just to walk, and they can safely walk to Morrison, like.
And
to
the project
field.
is designed to encourage walking.
Exactly.
And for that reason, we believe that the parking counts again are inflated, that there won't be as much need for parking because that's based on properties that can only be accessed by vehicle.
During
That will not be the
springtime.
case here.
During springtime, you'll see more children using their bikes.
Just this past spring and summer, we saw a significant increase in pedestrian activity. in
Especially with the
Islington
ice
Center.
cream.
Especially with the new ice cream place, that's right.
And if we got a sidewalk on Main Street.
Commuter parking is an issue for the train. We haven't chosen to enforce. We've got signs all over that say no all-day parking. We've discouraged some, but not all. We have chosen not to enforce that. We could.
Well, we can't enforce no all day. We'd have to come up with a different plan, but. 'cause
Well,
there-
you could.
Well, there's no
There are
definition,
ways.
there's no definition of what all day is.
Yeah,
So,
we
but
could
you could-
define it better.
Right.
We could install a meter with,
Right.
you know.
One of the
people
problems
paying.
with chasing people out of there is it pushes them into the neighborhood. They park on Stratford and Dean, and I live in Walpole, we ran through the same thing at the high school, where they just kept running and putting signs further and further away, trying to keep people out. So it becomes a quality of life for the neighborhood, whether they want to allow cars, you know, if they want to be able to park, a lot of those streets only have single-car driveways. And
Are
if
the
you,
lots filled at the train station?
no,
No, it's commuters who don't want
They
to
don't wanna
pay
pay.
a fee to park at the train station.
they don't want to pay.
We should be providing them free parking.
So there are options of
We
resident-only
could do that.
parking.
Right.
No, I don't think we've ever wanted to go down that route, but if it became necessary, we could have residents.
I mean, there's a system that Dedham put in its town center where you go to a kiosk, you get a ticket, you put it in the car, and that's your limit on parking, and you pay for it. We could implement something like that and make it work. It's just not been a necessity at the moment, but if it ever became a necessity or made sense to eliminate a conflict of parking for the folks that want to go to Little League games that are not able to park in front of the park because commuters are using those parking spaces during the day and coming back in the evening after the Little League game has started, well then we'll start implementing a system to free up those spaces so they're available for the park which they're intended to be used for.
Okay.
Nora, I did have a comment or question on the traffic plan. I was looking through it, and I apologize for being late. That I actually got caught up reading it and looked down and said, oh my gosh, I gotta leave. One of the things that I was hoping would be looked at, and it doesn't look like it was looked at as an option for the various options for the East Street, Washington Street intersection, and it may not be plausible at all, but one of the thoughts that came up was, much like you have a left turn straight coming northbound, as opposed to having a dedicated left turn lane for East Street coming southbound, if they replicated that on the opposite side of the cycle.
So that was discussed at the
Oh, okay.
planning board meeting, and the concern was, one is a lead time, the other would have to be a lag time.
Right.
And the problem with the, as I understand it, the lag, let me get this right, if you have the lead time, where you have an arrow
Car
telling you
already
can turn
stopped.
left, and all the traffic coming in the other direction has a red light, that is a safe movement. However, if you have the lag time, where the cars are all going through straight, and then one of them gets the left-hand turn and the other gets a red light, the driver who's getting the red light does not realize that the driver coming in the other direction has a green arrow. They see them coming and they think they can keep going, and it has a higher rate of accidents. So they did discuss that at the planning board meeting, and the engineers for that reason recommended against it. They're comfortable with lead arrows, but not with lag arrows.
Okay.
All right, well, if there's nothing else, then the only other item, we should schedule another meeting. We'd like to meet in early April. And the goal for the April meeting will be to have this task force discuss and propose a recommendation to the planning board on the Islington Center redevelopment project. The the planning board is expected to take that to a vote, possibly as soon as April 10th. And so we would like to meet before April 10th. So if everyone can look at their calendars, I know we don't have very many people here tonight, so I will do this by email, but if you want to start by picking dates that do or don't work for you.
Nora, can I make a suggestion, given the high, I think it's an obligation, people need to be at that meeting.
I agree.
I'm very concerned of the number, I understand the weather.
Right,
But we
there
have
was, I heard from
responsibility. Yeah, we have
four
responsibility
of
to
our
take a
task
vote on
force
this.
members
Yeah.
who could not make it today because too many other meetings got rescheduled for this date. So it was purely storm related, and they're not intentionally shirking their responsibilities.
No, I just think it's very, very important that people take that meeting.
Yes.
Okay?
So the options are April 3rd, 4th, or 5th.
And beyond time.
Yes, no, we gave you a pass.
I can do the 3rd and the 5th.
Is there anyone else who can't do either the 3rd or the 5th?
No, I could do either one, or
Tuesday or
Tuesday and
Thursday.
Thursday.
So do you, why don't we hold both open and you poll?
I'll do that,
Yeah.
I'll hold
You
the rest
poll
of
the rest of
the...
the people and see which works for everyone.
All right.
April 3rd, my wife is perfect.
All right.
either one.
I'll do that. Well, since we didn't have a quorum, it's not an official meeting, I don't need a motion to adjourn, we can just go home. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.